Yes, good evening, everybody. I want to take you on a journey that I never planned for. Maybe I prepared for a bit, but the journey I take you to is now into enlightening solidarity, into deep valleys of repression, but also into inspiration, or in other words, how to become a hashtag. How to meet inspiring people you never thought you would meet. How to run a half marathon on 15-meter rounds. A lot of different things, and in the end, to stand on a red carpet. So, let me invite you to how to become a hashtag. And it all started in a place which had as much light as here, but it was sunlight in the backyard of a little hotel on the Büyükada Islands, very beautiful Princess Islands close to Istanbul. And we were asked to do a training for human rights defenders by the Turkish Human Rights Platform on dealing with stress and trauma and digital integrity. Now you can imagine some chairs standing around, 8 human rights defenders who feel the pressure of repression in Turkey growing, especially since the 2015 coup. And we're sitting there planning for the day to come, especially talking about what kind of exercises they want to do on dealing with stress and trauma, getting rid of emotions, trying to bear with the burdens. And suddenly the door gets slammed open and 30 armed officers storm the room. In the first moment, we don't know they're officers because they're plain clothes, they're all armed. And then they shout at us in Turkish, which I don't understand at that time. Immediately, one of the members translates and says, this is a raid, we're going to be detained, and we're not allowed to touch anything, not our phones, not our computers, keep sitting. So we're sitting there. Then there's this usual procedure of collecting all phones, all laptops, everything which is digital in the room, everything's filmed. And there's a process of identification and all this, and my brain just goes in that's how it feels like. And later I get to know that one of the participants thought, well, they invested a lot of making this a real role play. It wasn't. So some hours later of identification and checking our bags and all that, one of the participants says and we're sitting there in the circle, Peter, wasn't this a session on exercises of dealing with stress and trauma? And I'm like, yes. And she's like, so what can we do right now? Can you do an exercise with us? And just thought I've done a lot of different workshops in different settings, but in the moment of a raid where I'm arrested as well, I never tried that one. So just maybe not to prepare you, but it was a very simple exercise that came to me, and I just want to invite you to do it together with me. And maybe you know it from your childhood. You take your thumb and your index finger together, or maybe you just do it, and then thumb, index finger on top. Right, I see some letters walking up, and then you walk the letters up. So for people who feel like, I know it since my childhood days, it's not a challenge at all, you just walk through your fingers. And suddenly your brain starts, that's the other way it works. So that's the exercise I do with them. Did anybody of you during the 5-10 seconds that we did the exercise think about that we're sitting at a TEDx talk about terrorism? No. So that's actually what these exercises can do with us. They bring us to a different space, and they bring our mindset to a different space. And in this way, our whole body gets a different experience for the moment we do these exercises, despite being raided. So what happens afterwards, short moments after, we find ourselves in a police station, and a lot of tohu wabohu, but 24 hours incommunicado. That means we're not allowed to call lawyers, consulate, or whatever. And the same night, the other 8 of us, or the 8 human rights defenders who were in the training, are taken to mainland Istanbul, to different prisons. And Ali Garavi, my colleague and friend, and I, we spent the nights at Büyük Ada Island in this little police station prison. And it's not a prison, it's a police station that has 2 cells for people who are overdrugged, take too much alcohol, or supposed terrorists. So we are lucky, because the policemen also are not trained on how to deal under the state of emergency with terrorism suspects. So after 24 hours, when the ban is lifted, people are allowed to visit us. And this was already the moment when we got to meet some of the most inspiring and supportive people for the whole period, which took us 113 days into detention, which was a legal team. Because, sure enough, the civil society, the human rights society in Turkey, the community, they knew where we are. They knew that this workshop is running. It was a public workshop. So once they didn't get any connection anymore via social media or so to the other participants, and also our security check-in didn't happen after 24 hours the same day, so they got on alert, they called the hotel, they knew we were taken to the police station. So they informed immediately the consulate all that happened, and we got to meet lawyers we never met before, and it just clicked. And I knew these lawyers will go through all the shit which might happen. And at that moment, there was still this thought of like, how long is it actually going to happen, the thing? So we had discussions and people said, like, one night, this is just deterrence, they will release you. You're German, you're Swedish, don't worry, you get out soon. After the second night there, I felt, maybe we're not getting out so soon. But we already had the exercises in the first day, and as I'm training since more than a decade on dealing with stress and trauma, there were some routines which really helped me. And yeah, one of the inspiring people, or 2 actually of the inspiring people we met, were the consulate people. You know that consulates in all countries have to support their citizens. Okay, they do this normally in a very diplomatic and political correct and so manner. I was lucky the 2 consulate staff who were responsible for taking care of me and other prisoners in the Istanbul region were really, really caring. And there was I think, mutual inspiration. So once they asked me in a visit, and they managed to have it nearly all 3-4 weeks, if you could imagine being an animal in prison, what would you be? And we had this thing of like, these are anyhow not normal prison visits for them. So they felt free to ask weird questions. And I thought like, sure, a bird, just to fly away. And then I thought like, well, that's too easy. So mine was the elephant, having a thick skin to everything what happens, but keeping the empathy with all fellow prisoners around me, which I didn't know before. But also, yeah, having the social approach to everybody, including the guards, although I didn't understand them most of the time, and they didn't understand me. So this was quite deep for me, being in this contact already. Now from the island, we went to the underground police station, or no, it's not an underground police station, it's a police presidium in Istanbul called Vatan, the Fatherland, and it has an underground parking space which is turned into an anti-terrorism prison. And their life is completely different because 24/7 no sunlight, but 24/7 light in all the cells. Video surveillance all the time, camera, German brand. Nice cooperation. So there's this check-in procedure, and we get separated into the different cells, and I understand how these cells work somehow, and I get into my row, and they tell me F2 is my cell. So the cells are made for 2 people. You might know from your sports time at school these blue rubbered mattresses that you use for high jumping or so that you don't injure yourself. Exactly these kinds. 2 of them smaller as beds, and a third one as a prayer mat, a bit bigger. My cell already has 3 people, and I'm a bit hesitant to get in because I feel like, well, there are already 3. So they push me in, and the other 3 immediately talk to each other and free one of the beds, and 2 of them move to the prayer mat. And then they grasp easily that I don't speak Turkish. So they start translating, they talk to me, and we start really getting into contact. And this was the first big move of solidarity that I felt after the lawyers and the consulate, this solidarity between us prisoners. And under the terrorism laws in Turkey, and especially the state of emergency, there are a lot of people who are completely innocent in detention. There are tens of thousands of people detained who never thought how to spell the word terrorism properly. But they all end up in these cells. So what do you do there? You have 24/7, you have no pens, no paper, no book except one Quran per cell. Nothing else to do, and you're all waiting. Maximum 14 days, then the court has to rule about you if you have to go into detention or into arrest, or if you're freed. So the perspective of 14 days, nothing to do, is not so inspiring. And I'm not a person to do nothing. It just doesn't work with me. I cannot even really get really bored. So I thought about what to do. So we get some food, which was horrible, but we also get some bottles with water. And there's a wrapping around. So if you tear it in little bits and pieces, and you take 3 of these little bits and pieces, the little strings, then you can weave them. And you can use them, for example, as a belt, because you had to give away your belt, you could hang yourself. I made the jokes that food is not so bad to hang myself, but still they took my belt, or his shoelaces. And later, one of the prisoners, fellow inmates, he asked me, like, can I take one of these bands with me when I leave, if I go to detention or free? He didn't know at that point, because it somehow resembles for me that we were so much woven together by this repression. So he takes them out, and later we managed to smuggle out many more of them. And this creativity somehow really gave me a lot of energy, and it showed me, like, you don't have to be a victim in there. You can actually do something of changing the atmosphere. And that's what we then did. We started juggling with the bottles. So one officer said, we are not here at Circus Vatan. No, sure, we weren't in a circus, but there was a lot of spotlight too. So changing the atmosphere was also very important. And actually, this is one of the bands that I were weaving. And then from Vatan, we were brought, after 2 weeks, after a horrible court session, we were brought to another prison. For 2 weeks, Ali and me, we were together there. And then the officers came in one day after 2 weeks again and said, you're leaving. And we were like, oh, great, perfect. And then it took us another 5 minutes to understand, yes, to another prison. So we were transferred to Silivri prison, which is one of the spaces in Turkey with the highest level of education. There was a sociological study because there are so many academics detained there. And it's a huge prison with 15,000 inmates. And we got into block number 9, which is a high security prison. And there things turned very challenging in the beginning with complete one-person solitary confinement. But lucky enough, after 3 days, we went into 2-person solitary confinement. That means 24 hours a day together, sharing the same space, the same toilet, the same smells, the same sounds, everything. And a small yard, which is about 5 by 7 meters. And I start doing sports, because you have a lot of time, right? So what do? Things you thought you always wanted to do before, you never had the time. Now is the time to have it. And then also there comes this absurdity of this whole situation, and I thought, what would be the most absurd form of sports that you can do in there? Maybe long distance running? And I knew that the Berlin Marathon would approach, and I decided, okay, on the Berlin Marathon, I'm going to run a marathon here in rounds of 15 meters. And we made it a public event in solidarity of all political prisoners in Turkey. And it went roaming in Turkey, and it went roaming in Germany as well. And they established a lot of solidarity. And we had the solidarity with the lawyers especially, who became much more than just legal representatives. They became friends, psychologists, social workers, asking, do you need fresh laundry? asking, how's your psyche? And they had to read the letters from my loved ones to me, which was very funny because they were all written in German, but not all the lawyers spoke German. So they read letters they didn't understand, and then I had to translate them back to them. And we had a lot of laughter. And they also talked to me about the solidarity which is happening outside. And we had 1 hour per week to meet, and I had 10 minutes to talk with my loved ones every 2 weeks. So very confined situation of intense solidarity. And I heard a lot of different ways of solidarity. And one was, for example, the postcard and letter campaign. And I had started off in the early 90s, late 80s, in my human rights work as a volunteer with Amnesty International, writing these postcards against forgetting prisoners. And in the late 80s, there was one Turkish human rights defender, lawyer, Erin Keskin, and we wrote letters for her because she was jailed at that time. So I always felt, hey, writing letters to political prisoners, this must feel good inside. I can tell you now, it feels good to receive them, even if you don't receive them. So I didn't get one of the postcards inside jail. I got some of them afterwards. And this was really, really, really inspiring for me to read these solidarity messages, but it also carried me. And then I heard from my lawyers after everything was over, after the 25th of October 2017, that Erin Keskin was actually an observer to our court trial on the 25th, which made the circle very round to me. But now, last year, this picture was taken in front of the Brandenburg Gate, and she's in danger again. So we have to get our guts together again and put up solidarity. And this is really a thing which is really, really important for me, to have this solidarity which touches me on very different levels. And I think solidarity very often is a very heavy business. Writing postcards, but speaking up at demonstrations and whatever. But for me, it's also a very creative process. So I had the chance after the release to do some creative work as well, and this hammock is one of them. The strings have the imprinted solidarity messages that I got. I wrote them all down in the computer, then I printed them on 1.2 kilometers of string, and then I knotted them into this one. And it's actually one of my lawyers testing the hammock. And it's at the Arts Biennale. So there are many different ways we can deal with it. And one of the most important factors for me was also solidarity inside the Turkish civil society. So when I was released in the night, these lights were gone off somehow. The media was somehow leaving. And then a woman approached me and said, like, Peter, your shirt's really nice. I thought, like, what the fuck? Sorry, we just released. It's still an awkward situation. What do you want to tell me? And then she said, like, well, I only knew your photo and I knew your height. And I bought all the T-shirts, sweatshirts, whatever you wanted as clothes. I bought them for you. And then we both burst out into crying and hugging. And for me, it's this symbol of, if you want to share solidarity, there's no limitation that you have to be very courageous or whatever. There's a space for any kind of solidarity, for all capacities that we all have. And that's something which I would really like to share with you, this idea of care as resistance. You can take care with your small means that you have, with the small ideas that you have, but don't stop from them. So from our struggle, care as resistance, well-being as resilience. And I'm really happy, I'm very grateful for all of you that just by listening to me, sharing the solidarity and supporting the human rights defenders worldwide. Thank you so much.